could you quickly, explain how you would define what the American dream is, and give us a little more information about that?
Yes, so the American dream was an idea or concept that was created or established primarily after World War II, after the end of World War II, because during that time period, the United States experienced an increase in economic growth in the country, which also brought along with it an upward mobility within the middle classes within the United States population. And
sorry to interrupt, this is interesting what you're saying, because I think the way students learn it in Germany is that I think there's this maybe even a misunderstanding that I'm pretty sure most of the students who learn about this think that the American dream comes from way back then, from like the 18th century or something, when because we learn like, okay, it's about the Declaration of Independence and like, these the founding fathers, that they declared life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But like you said, the actual, which probably not so many know, that the actual, like, this concept, the American dream, is actually not that old, right? Compared to its origins. And
yes, I mean, I wouldn't equate liberty and freedom with the American dream, because you could go to any country at that time and be free to do what you wanted to do. Prior to World War II, America wasn't an extremely wealthy country, and so there was large disparities in economic wealth, similar to what we see today, actually. But the conditions were not in place, so to speak, for example, immigrant families to come and be successful, because there wasn't this large swell of economic wealth within the country to support that kind of those kind of aspirations and dreams of immigrant and migrant families. Now, after World War II, things started to shift, and this is what I mean by an economic increase within the country that was able to support people's aspirations for having a better life, right, and to achieving success. And with that came what I believe to be what we consider the American dream today, in that, to be successful is to have a house, to have a car, with a white picket fence around it, to have a nuclear family of, 4 or 5 people, a wife, a husband, and 2 or 3 kids, and to be able to also achieve your highest aspirations and dreams, right? I think this all was established after World War II. Now, of course, there were immigrants who flooded into the United States in the 1800s and early 1900s looking for a better life. But their ability to get there was not as great as it was post World War II.
I mean, this is very interesting, the point you've just made, because I think, very few might actually know like the connection between these things, and like have this understanding that, the American dream comes from this time of like, late 18th century or something, when immigration started happening. But like you said, the American dream as a concept, actually, I think I checked it, it originates from like the early 1930s only, right? And like what you're describing, that basically for this idea of this American dream to happen, you needed other factors or aspects in place that weren't previously there. So this is kind of a very interesting point.
Well, and to that note, you also needed the social constructs for it to work as well, because in the late 1800s, early 1900s in the United States, immigrants were often demonized and stigmatized and segregated in a similar way that many immigrants are today, for example, in the United States. If you immigrated from Italy or Poland, Eastern Europe, I mean, you were stigmatized, and there was a social disparity within the United States that kind of pushed you to the margins if you were not, you know, an American-born citizen. If you were a naturalized citizen, you were not openly welcomed into many American communities because many Americans viewed immigrants as a threat, right? They viewed them as in a similar way that we talk about it today. This was also the reality in the late 1800s, early 1900s. I would argue up through World War II, because remember, prior to World War II, we went through a Great Depression in the United States, and that also not only literally pushed people to the margins, but also figuratively pushed people to the margins as well, based on where you came from. After World War II, that's when the United States started to see a shift in our economic growth, and with that shift came a change in people's not only material wealth, but also social status within the country as well.
I see. So this is also interesting, like what you said about the social construct, that basically the American dream, as a concept, only works if it's achievable for everyone, right? And if like a huge proportion of the American population is already excluded from this idea of this ideal of this American dream, that wouldn't even be a concept, you know, in this form. Interesting.
Yeah, I think back then the country was promoting bringing immigrants into the country because we needed the skill and expertise that immigrants brought with them, because of where the country was at, you know, economically, racially, and to that degree. And so we promoted bringing immigrants in. However, there was also this nationalist kind of threat, right? That all of these people coming from all of these different countries are going to degrade the American society, and in a way, they're kind of like leeches on the American society. They're trying to leech off of us, quote unquote, us, the American people who were born here. And so we need to protect, you know, our culture, right? Because if we allow all these immigrants to come in, then what is the American culture, right? I mean, this was, I'm not saying this was the right idea, but I think this was the thought and feelings of many Americans at that time.
So what was the purpose then, like, to go a bit deeper, of the American dream? Because if I understand you correctly, there's a kind of economic, you know, economic thoughts behind it, right? Because what you said, you need like workers, basically. The country's economy was booming, and then but you needed people to do the work, basically, and you didn't have them in that quantity, I guess. And then you know, you create this concept of the American dream, but in a way it is like, if I understand correctly, it's kind of contradictory to what actually happened then, or is that?
Well, if you think about the 1800s and the early 1900s, America was in large part this huge open country that in many parts of the country had not been discovered, right? And so there was a push, in large part by the government, and in a certain part by the private sector as well, to go explore the West, right? And you need people, right? You got to build railroads, you got to build towns, you got to build an infrastructure to support people moving west. And where do you get that support from? Or where do you get that, you know, those workers? Well, they have to come from somewhere. And we accepted immigrants in because we knew there was a role for them to play within the evolution of the country.
So do you think the American dream was, you know, this concept is equally, or was equally true for, you know, Americans as well as for immigrants coming into the country? Or do you think there was a difference between these two like groups, if you?
I think both. I think from an American perspective, we wanted to, of course, increase our status in the world. We wanted to increase our economic wealth, and so we saw immigrants as a way to do that. Now, there's a saying, "Be careful what you ask for," right? And I think in one sense, Americans wanted immigrants to come in, but Americans didn't want immigrants in large numbers to come to degrade the cultural aspect of America. And so we wanted to grow and become this great power without sacrificing our culture, right? And who we are as Americans.
I mean, I think this is interesting as well because, this is also like what usually we don't have time in lessons or something. We talk about these cultural topics to go deeper into the matter. But I think what from a German perspective, what many students might not know or forget is that actually in the 1930s, like racial segregation was still like a big thing, right? So, and this is also something. So that's why I'm asking a bit like. Is the American dream, is this, a concept for everyone basically, or did in the past, like immigrants, racial or ethnic minorities or Americans, did they feel similarly about this? I mean, of course, you're not an expert at this, I know, but what do you think is like, how was that connected,
Well, I think the short answer is no. The American dream has always been an illusion for a certain group or certain segment of the population. Look, if you were Black or brown in the United States, even to a certain degree today, there have been racial disparities and there have been ceilings, right, on how high you can go in society because of the social constructs that we have created, right? And they're not even visible many times, right? So for example, if you were a Black family that wanted to go to a bank to get a loan to buy a house, right? Many
that didn't
times
happen, right? Usually
the banks would deny you, not because you didn't have the money and you couldn't afford it, but because you were Black, right? And so you may see your neighbors who are, well, actually, they probably were not your neighbors because many times Black families were not allowed into white neighborhoods. But you may have seen, your coworkers who are buying the house with a nice car, have the nice family, and you see them and you think, well, that is what the American dream is, but that's not the American dream for me, right? Because that's not achievable in totality for me because of the color of my skin. Now, where many immigrants, so we wrap this back around, where many immigrants kind of got a pass is most of them were from Europe, from European descent, and they were white, right? And so they may have faced some type of discrimination, but it wasn't based on the color of their skin. And the color of a person's skin was a huge barrier in where you could go and what you could do and how successful you could be. And this is one reason why even, the US government, was giving out loans, right, to small businesses, farmers, to grow more crops, to start more businesses. But in many cases, they were not going to to the Black community. They were going to white immigrants, for example, right? America was willing to subsidize many times white European immigrants, not because they could do the job better, but because of the color of their skin, right?
I think this is something that's a very interesting topic. Maybe we can pick this up in another session. This kind of which I think also is like, it's very difficult to imagine if you've never lived in the US, like to understand really how deeply rooted racial inequality in the US is. And I think specifically targeted towards like, African Americans or the Black community, right?
Yeah.
And this is again also like, I mean, like I said, we might not be able to go into this right now, but this is also one aspect why what I think people who are not aware of this, why you don't understand, like, the movement that has started this year, and why you don't even get what the problem is, because and like I said, maybe we can pick this up at the later session. What I want to ask you about the American dream is like, basically, so this is where it originates, right? And then how long did you think, or do you think that this idea of the American dream still exists today? Is it something that do you feel like it's accessible, or it's an idea that a lot of people, either Americans or like immigrants coming into the US, they have it still, or is this a concept of the past, or does it still exist?
I think it still exists, but to a much smaller degree.
Okay.
I still believe there are immigrants who come to the United States in search of the quote unquote American dream. And by that, I mean the idea of being success, whatever that means to them, right? But as an American, I think the American dream doesn't exist in the way that it existed, say, 20 years ago or 30 years ago, right? Because, for example, I take myself as an example. I went to university. I finished graduate school. I have a master's. So if you want to talk about success, well, many people who look at me would say, well, you are part of the American dream. But when I think about myself, I don't think about myself as achieving or have achieved the American dream. Maybe I've achieved one step in the process of getting there, but it's becoming more and more difficult for even people like myself to feel like we can achieve whatever this thing is that we consider the American dream. Because I don't think the American dream also is no longer a house and a car and a family of 2 or 3 kids.
How has this changed? What would you say is different now?
I think the biggest change has come with women, right? Women are now more educated than they've ever been in the past, right? Because when we talked about the 1940s and the 1950s, right after World War II, women were still predominantly working at home, right? They were still predominantly
taking care of their kids, right?
Homemakers, exactly. But now women are maybe more educated than men are in the country, and with that, I think comes also women's desire to achieve their own goals, right? And that may not include having kids at a younger age or buying a house. It may mean
freedom or something, right? Exactly.
Or, exactly. So that also has affected how we define or try to describe what the American dream is. I think today the American dream is more so financial security, being able to live comfortably and do things that make you happy or bring you happiness. And that may not mean buying a house and having kids, right? that may mean that 3 or 4 weeks out of the year you can travel to another country and experience the fullness of some other place. Or take on a hobby that you enjoy doing. It may not mean what the American dream meant, decades ago. So the American dream still, I think, exists, in a certain way. It's just taken on a different kind of dimension.
Okay, very interesting.
Because I also think, to this point, immigrants aren't necessarily flocking to the United States like they used to flock to the United States, because I think people from other countries are recognizing that what you have in the United States, you can also have in your own country or in another country as well. And maybe even to a greater degree. There was a study, I don't remember exactly where it was, but it said, if you want to achieve the American dream, you're more likely to achieve it, not in America, actually.
Really?
But in Scandinavia, I believe it was either Norway
or something.
If you want to achieve what we consider the American dream, you have to go to one of those countries to actually do it. It would not be in the United States, given our current kind of situation.
I mean, this is something that kind of I've read and heard about this as well, that the recent, or like these Scandinavian countries are very advanced, not only like when it comes to like the educational system or something, so talking about schools and how they educate their youth basically, but also in a lot of other areas, like also with, I think Norway is the country where this factor of equality between men and women is the closest together or something. And I think the articles that I've read also made the point that this also shows how advanced the country is, when basically gender doesn't play a part in which jobs you get, or how you're productive you can be for the country's economy or something. So that's very interesting. I mean, this is something like I'm just thinking about Germany. If we have I don't think in Germany we have something that is close to like a concept like the American dream or something. I would agree that basically in Germany, I think it also it has changed similarly from what happened in the US. So we, like I said, we never had an American dream, but the dream that the Germans had, maybe it didn't have a name, but it was also like to have a house, to have a family. So I think if you look at like the social aspect of the dream, that was maybe very similar to the components or the elements of the American dream initially. And I think this changed now, what has happened even in Germany, and I think also around the world. And I mean, I live in England now, so it's very similar there. I think it's this switch from like maybe also a bit of switch from like this material understanding of a dream or something. I would also agree with you. So it's still financial stability, but it's also the freedom to do what you want to do, and that makes you happy. And you've mentioned that. And I think this also has to do, like, maybe we talk in a later session about this as well, but the different generations, like generation X, Y, and Z, and like the millennials and all these things, because actually this has the huge effect on, like, I would say the understanding and the cultural understanding of concepts and stuff. So this would be interesting to look at. Do you know of any other country who has something like similar, like a real concept of the American dream? Or do you think this is just specific, like, again, we are not experts on this topic, but I'm just thinking about, I cannot think of any other country that has made a concept like this, so I know advertised it so much.
Well, listen, I think America has always had the benefit of having Hollywood on its side, and Hollywood will promote that America is the land of the American dream. But you can go to Canada and have the American dream. I think the American dream is this idea that there is no ceiling, right? That you can.
But that's not really true, as you said, right? It's not the reality.
Well, in reality, exactly. But there is this idea, right? And the system is in place. We have a constitution that allows people the opportunity, or supposedly allows people the opportunity to aspire and to achieve as much as they can based on their own willingness and perseverance and drive and whatnot. To wrap this back to Germany and to Europe, I think maybe, and I could be wrong, but I think maybe the reason why in Germany and other European countries you don't have this exact concept of an American dream is because historically, European countries have been controlled by aristocracies or monarchies that have placed a cap and a ceiling on where people can go, right? Because, if you grew up, in England, in France, in Spain, most European countries have some type of monarchy that had a king and a queen, and you knew that you could never rise all the way to the top because they sat at the top and they controlled where and what you could do. In America, I think this is why people flocked to America, because there was no king, right? You were the king of your own destiny. And it just, what mattered was how much were you willing to put into it, to get there. And I still think this is part of what draws people to the United States, is this idea of there is no ceiling, quote unquote ceiling. I mean, in reality, there is, but we create this illusion that there is no ceiling. And so you can go as far as, your heart desires, and your feet will carry you, and you can make it happen. And there are a lot of success stories. There's a lot of immigrants who have come to the United States. I mean, the country is built on the backs of immigrants, right? And so there's still this illusion, that you can achieve it.
I mean, this is interesting because from my perspective, right? Like, so I lived and studied in the US for like 2 years, and I have to say, from the feeling that I had living there, and I also like lived in Brazil, Germany, of course, and then now been living here in England since 2015. I never had a feeling quite like when I was in the US, because it really felt like, if I worked hard enough, that I could achieve anything. So I'm just wondering, was this an illusion, or is there really something to it? That Americans, because when also talking about like, in terms of like creating something new, being innovative and things, and I feel like that the US is still a bit ahead in this kind of aspect, because when I mean, also looking from me as a teacher, like I was much more free to experiment and to do new things in the US than I was in any other country that I've worked and even studied. And I always got the feeling that we had fixed structures, like, in England, in Germany or something, and that the structures in the US were more flexible. And also, like, for example, at university, professors or universities are much more open to kind of let you do what you want in a way. So, for example, just to give you an example why I'm thinking like this, it's like when I did my degree in the US, I studied German, but then in my first semester there, I found this like this field of studies called second language acquisition, and applied linguistics. That's basically about all the like theories and methodologies of how languages are learned and taught. And even though there was no degree, the university was very open, and they actually allowed me to basically mainly focus on these aspects, even though it had nothing to do with German in a way. So I had to, of course, sit some German modules, but they were much more flexible in letting me do basically in a way what I wanted. And I have never felt something similar in, when I studied in Germany, or also like work-wise and stuff. And I wonder if maybe this is not directly connected to the American dream, but I think there's an element of why if you ask me now, I would also say, I still think there's something like an American dream. And I had the feeling, at least, maybe the reality is different, but I definitely had the feeling that if I had stayed in the US, and I also know from some of my, the friends I had back then, some of them stayed and they became professors and stuff. So, and this is, I still think that, there might be, maybe not in this like ideal form or something, but maybe there's still something to the US, if you know what I mean. I don't know. What do you think about this?
Well, I think there is still...
the reason why I'm asking is because you've also traveled the world, right? You've lived in other countries. So, you can kind of you can judge this a bit better, I think.
Yeah. Well, I still definitely, well, let me just start by saying, I think what you just explained is one reason why America has been able to sustain the influence that it has today in the world, and that is because we are an innovative country. We try to be as innovative as possible. We try to evolve, I think, as much as we can. We welcome new ideas. We welcome new ways of doing things. We try to encourage that, not only from a young age, but even, you know, through primary and secondary school. This idea of you know, open thought and to view things in a different way. And I think with that comes innovation. Right now, what I would preface that by saying America has created the conditions for innovation. I think a lot of the innovations that we see come out of the United States actually come from immigrants, right? People who came from another country and they felt that they were being limited in their ability to, you know, think outside of the box and to innovate. They come to America to start these ideas and to get them off of the ground and to build them up. But I still think this is one of the attributes that America still has and still possesses, especially for highly educated people. If you have a high level of education, you know, America is still a place where you can do very big things if you have the desire, you know, to do that.
I mean, maybe that's a bit like, you know, that's a good point to mention, because I basically was doing that on the university level, right? Which in terms of like, which makes a difference, right? If you come as, you know, as someone who's basically, you know, using or making use of the educational system at the highest level, basically, which, you know, is already kind of falsifying the perception that you have, right, of the country, because you're already, you know, in a kind of, how would I say, in an area that, you know, not all of the people reach, right? So it's like what you're saying. So I think this is also where, you know, it's a bit distorted, maybe, the view, because it is true if you're highly educated or something, you know.
I definitely think there are barriers to entry, right? I mean, but once you enter in, I think you're in a relatively good place to be able to find success and to find happiness in you know, in what you want to do, because when you talk about the U.S. education system, and this is also probably for another topic, you know, it's not one that's created equally on a racial level, on an economic level. It's we have some issues that I think definitely have to be addressed, and very soon, because we are, in a way, leaving behind generations of young people because of our education system. But if you are fortunate enough to get a good education and to enter through those barriers into this realm of openness and innovation, then you can definitely go very far.
But again, what you also said many times throughout the session already, it has this racial aspect to it, right? So, like, you know, because
it has a racial aspect, but it also has an economic aspect, because to be quite honest with you, when it comes to education, it doesn't matter whether you're Black or white or Latino or you know, or Asian American. If you come from a low income background, if your family comes from a low socioeconomic status within the country, you're not going to get the same level of education that someone, you know, whose parents or family comes from, you know, a higher socioeconomic background. Now, what tends to happen are who are the people at the low end of the socioeconomic ladder? It tends to be people of color, right? So there's no coincidence that it's like that. So there is a racial aspect to it as well. But when it comes to the quality of the education, many times it's just based on, what the socioeconomic background is.
All right. Okay. Thanks for the session so far. And I think in the next couple of sessions, we'll talk a bit more and expand on like these things that we've mentioned, like maybe racial injustice, racial inequality, and also maybe look a bit deeper into the educational system.